you, Lenny. And thank you for the opportunity again. So let me start by just giving this some context. Like you indicated already, this is a continuing conversation on responsible AI in research. And we did start this conversation last year in November, where we started going through the concepts of responsible use of AI in scholarship. And based on that conversation that we had, we decided to actually run a survey with the participants of that webinar that we ran in November. And what we would like to do now is to continue the conversation, but actually basing it and anchoring it on the findings of the actual survey. So in other words, we are contextualizing it to say in the global south and across the Research for Life eligible countries, this is the experience, and we'd like to share those insights with this class. The idea is that we spark the conversation going forward in actually contextualizing the findings, the concepts that are there, and ensuring that we put it along the findings of other studies that have been done internationally, globally, to see what is happening in other regions as well. So we would like then to be able to compare and contrast the findings from other regions with what we are finding in the global south. And so that's what we would like to do in this conversation. We will touch on the concepts again, just to rehash the concepts for the benefit of those who were not in the session last year in November, but also give an opportunity to new conversations and questions and address those that come up in this session. So that's what we would like to do. It is more intended to be a conversation more than just a lecture. And we would like to continue learning as we go forward. So let me take the opportunity to introduce again my colleague, Dr. Andrew Cox at Sheffield University. We have continued to work on this kind of work in the last 7-8 years together, and that collaboration continues between Sheffield University and iTalker, and of course with Research for Life. So thank you again for the opportunity learning. I would like to ask Andrew to start with a few slides that we have to give it a context of what the study that we have done, and then we will then switch on and move on to the concepts as we move forward. Thank you very much. Andrew, if you can hear me, I will run the slides from this end, if that's okay with you.
Of course, great.
Thank you.
Okay. So we start the presentation with just a bit of a reflection on the wider context. Hopefully this is useful. So a number of studies have shown that actually the attitudes to AI in the general population in global south, if that's the right term, is actually tends to be more positive than in the global north. So the US, I suppose, is the center of AI development. But it seems there are more people who are more concerned and excited about AI in the USA than many countries in Africa, such as Kenya. You're looking down the list, you can see Nigeria. People tend to be more positive about AI than people who are more exposed to it. And maybe the lesson there is the more you use AI, the more suspicious you are of it. Next slide. But the sort of counter evidence, though, is that, at least according to this Microsoft study, people in the global south have got a lot less access to AI. So you can see in sub-Saharan Africa, apart from South Africa, there's a big red blob of not many people having access. It's countries like the United States and Canada and Europe and a few other small countries like Singapore and United Arab Emirates. They've got a lot of AI access. They're using AI more, even though people in the global south are perhaps more optimistic. Next slide. And then I got a couple of, going to reflect on a couple of reports that have been about um, AI use among researchers that have been published in the last 6 months or so, um, and to set our results in context. So, an OUP, Oxford University Press survey from 2024, it got a lot of results. And they did this thing that people like to do with research, is like, oh, put people into boxes. So you've got the challengers who are completely against AI, concerned pessimists, cautious time savers, pioneers. I'm not sure about these categories, but in that report, which is based on a lot of data, you can see hundreds of research results. These are the categories that they suggest. Interestingly, they see some patterns, and just a few of those patterns are challengers, these people who are against AI, are much more from the humanities disciplines than, say, social science or STM. And challenges, interestingly, are more among young researchers than older ones. I find that a surprising finding, but that's what they found. And they're saying pioneers are more common outside US and Europe. So again, another pattern that we might not have expected. We know China's very interested in AI, developing it very fast, but it seems that the pioneers in research are maybe not where you might expect. Next slide. And then this is a bit hard to read, but it's telling us about, again, from the OUP study, how are people actually using AI? So it's broken down by these different groups. But essentially, you can see that people, what are people using AI for? What are researchers using AI for? Well, they're using it to edit the write-up of research. Yeah, that sounds likely. Summarizing existing research, so it's helping them read publications, things like that. Discovering new research, well, or discovering existing research, so they're using it as a discovery tool. That's quite interesting because I think, as someone who supports libraries a lot, I'll be a little bit worried about that. Analyzing research data is another fairly big use. And again, I'll be a bit worried about using AI in that context. And then generating ideas for research, that's another fairly common use. But you can see some other uses. There are some people who are using it for things like designing research or marketing and outreach. Um, Next slide. And then another even more recent piece of research from Wiley, another publisher. This is their findings. Um, so, and again, it's about researchers' use of AI. I think that's what we're focusing on in this talk, really. So you can see that in 2025, 84% of researchers who replied to their survey are using AI in some sort of way as part of their research. And that's quite a big leap from 57% the previous year. So that's a lot of people, the majority of people, a big majority who are using AI. And then how often do you typically use it? You can see there's a moderate amount of people using it daily, and maybe like about 50% using it daily or weekly. And then there's quite a long tail, you could say, of people using it a little bit. Next slide. And then this is showing what they use. And again, it's kind of not surprising. But remember, these are surveys that cover the whole world, and typically response rates from the global north, Europe and America, are much greater than from other parts. But you can see what are they actually using? They're using ChatGPT, they're using DeepSeek, they're using Gemini, Copilot a bit, Claude a bit. So they're using probably the free versions of these generative AI tools. They're not using the many sort of AI specialist research tools like Consensus and Elicit. They're not using either the publisher AI tools like Scopus AI or Science Direct AI. So we can see that people are basically using the AI that everybody's heard of, ChatGPT, but they're using it in a research context. And I've got a suspicion that they're using the free version. Next slide. And then the final slide from again from this Wiley research. These were the use cases that researchers were most interested in. So they're most interested in AI helping to write manuscripts, to help them write, AI to work with lots of amounts of information to monitor and summarize. So I'm guessing that's the literature review. Working with large amounts of information to process and analyze. So again, it's probably to analyze their own data. Then they're interested in AI to make research accessible to wider populations. To me, that seems like a really good, we've been talking about creating lay summaries of research to explain it to the public for a long time. That's one of the things AI is great at, is converting our complex academic language into stuff that's understandable to the public, I guess. Offloading essential but less engaging work, that's another thing people want to do. And they want AI to enhance research methods. So that gives us a sense of the kind of uses people want to make of it. So I think that's quite useful. I think the next slide is back to you, Gracian. Oh no, one more slide from me. Apologies. What are the concerns? Well, you can see again from 20 to 25 of the darker green ones. So people are more concerned about inaccuracy than they were before. More people are using AI, but more people are more concerned about accuracy, privacy, they're still concerned about the ethics. What is an ethical use? Lack of transparency about how they work, a lack of guidelines, and the need for skills. So those are the kind of barriers. And again, our survey looks at that as well. So I think now that is hand-to-hand integration.
Thank you very
Great.
much. That. So what I'd like to do now is to contextualize a bit more on our findings and have the conversation that really speaks to what more of what we received from those who participated in the study. And the aim of the study was to discover how the Research for Life community view the use of generative AI in research. And the research questions were largely focused on how AI is being used for now and what are the attitudes of the researchers towards AI. We did the administration in April, so this is quite new. But of course, the limitation was that it was only in English. It will be interesting to see what is coming from other regions and in other languages as well. We had a total of 106 responses to the survey, and these are the categories that we had. The faculty, we had 49 of them, those PhD students, 9, and masters, 20, and those who had the title of librarians, information specialists, we had 14 of them. The experience varied quite a lot, from just under 5 years to those that have got over 10 years in terms of working with generative AI, which is quite interesting given that this has become a topical issue in the last decade or so, and many, especially in the global north, have had the chance to spend some time working with the tools, generative AI tools, like Andrew has indicated. The countries in the majority were from the West Africa region. We didn't get much from that, from outside the East, the West, and Central and Northern Africa. So we had very few, actually one from South Africa, but obviously it's because Research for Life is not eligible for that country. Okay, and a majority of the respondents were from the social science discipline. And we also had some hard sciences, STEM, especially agriculture and health. And it was interesting to note that in line and in tandem with what is happening in the other regions, which is what Andrew referred to, many of the tools are similar in terms of use, okay? Majority were leveraging ChatGPT, and quite a number of the responses, over 70%, alluded to the fact that they use ChatGPT a lot, okay, in their work. And also tools like Grammarly also were used significantly. And we saw that in the other study, which was global, that Andrew referred to, DeepSeek, Copilot, and Gemini also came out, okay? So it's interesting to see that Africa, well, I mean, the sub-Sahara region in Africa, which was included in this, particularly West Africa, we see that it is in tandem with what is happening beyond the global South regions, which is quite interesting. So when you really delve into the actual use to say, what are they doing as far as the research life cycle, and what point and what tools are they leveraging on, and what are they doing with that? We see that, interestingly, developing research ideas was quite high in terms of use, over 61%. Okay. You also see that summarizing research articles, which again is in tandem with what we're seeing globally, it's also being used quite significantly, 54%. There are others using it for translating articles from different languages, which is interesting. So that means more and more tools have become more accurate in terms of translation, and therefore the researchers are leveraging those tools, okay? Synthesizing literature, which is really one of the one of the aspects that has been used over the years, is actually gaining momentum, and that's interesting to see that, okay? Together with processing the data. Once you've got your data and you want to clean it, you want to manage it, you want to ensure that you've done proper coding, for example, all those kind of things, using tools like Claude, tools like ChatGPT. There's quite a lot of use in that, and like Andrew has indicated, it's obviously the jury is still out as far as whether the use of these tools, particularly in data processing, is acceptable and is an ethical use of it, especially if there is a declaration of that. I think the jury is still out there in what the users are saying on that. Okay. Also, what was the highlight there was the proofreading, editing kind of thing, which has been really basic. But you could argue that that has been going on for a long time, even before the time of generative AI tools. We know that grammar, for example, has been a part of our word processing suites that we have used over the years, and those small tools have actually been quite popular with many of our researchers over the years. So that was quite interesting to see this kind of trend of use. Just before I leave that slide, what surprised me was that the project administration aspects and the use is pretty low still in this region with only 22%. So you would expect that administrative issues wouldn't be too controversial, managing the actual data itself, making them formatting and things like that, and also making sure that you can actually find the data when you want to use it again. You would think that there will be more use of that. So that kind of surprised me. And what are the barriers to the use of AI? And the major barriers that were highlighted and in that order, with the lack of institutional guidelines on AI, the frameworks are simply not there yet in many institutions, in many regions, and more to speak, in many countries, there are no national frameworks to refer to. When I looked up to see at this point in Africa, for example, how many countries have got national frameworks or policies on AI use? It was interesting to see that there is only now, depending on how you count, 14 to 16 countries that they've got in place the national policies. Many of them, they are new, they are emerging, and many of them are not yet implemented. So the actual use at the national level. And therefore, you would expect that there would still be many institutions, even that are working in research, that still don't have national frameworks as the guideline, and also don't have institutional policies in place. I will tell you that just last week, the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies in South Africa had to recall the national draft policy on AI. And interestingly, what was the problem? It was because when it went out for the 2 months to get public feedback, they discovered that there were citations that were fake in that document. They had actually generated some of the citations, and there were, points of hallucination coming from the tools that they actually use themselves. I mean, it was quite a big embarrassment for the communications and digital technologies ministry to be able to do that. So they've actually had to take it back, and stop sharing it now. The cost of AI tools are still an issue. And like Andrew did indicate, that many do come with a version that is free, like ChatGPT, and like many others, like Claude, like many others that are out there. So the lighter version, if you like, is available to everyone for free who registers. But once you want much more complicated use of these tools, then you have to pay a premium for it. And then as a result, the argument, obviously, from my point of view, is that the digital divide continues between the global south and the global north. So those that have got the credit cards, those that have got the institutions that can actually afford to subscribe and pay for these tools will benefit much more than those of us don't have those abilities to be able to do that. We don't have the budgets, nor do we have even the credit cards that will need to be charged $25 a month for me to be able to get the premium kind of version of ChatGPT. And therefore, we are continuing with the challenges that we have had over the years of the digital divide between the global north and the global south. So the ethical concerns about the use of AI also came up with 53% there, indicating that it's quite a barrier. And how do you actually measure that? And how do you ensure that the tools that are being used are actually in line with the frameworks that are there? I'll pick universities, for example, in South Africa, that have now published the frameworks at the institutional level and asking the scholars, be it the lecturers, the professors, and the students, to be able to publish and indicate in their work how much of that has been inspired or used through tools that are AI tools. And how do you then manage that in terms of citation and things like that? It's been a challenge, but I must commend universities that have been able to do that. And it's interesting that a number of them are now following that route. Inaccuracy of AI generated results, I already mentioned citation issues, like in the example that I've given for the Communications and Digital Technologies Ministry in South Africa, which becomes a major challenge when you don't have a human eye going through to ensure that the citations are actually true and that they can be followed and they can be repeated and they're actually genuine. So that's quite important. So you can't rely on only what is generated through AI. And lack of training, and upskilling to ensure that the colleagues are actually leveraging the use of the tools that are out there, even from the beginning, to make sure that if they are going to be using prompts, those prompts are written properly and they are effective. Just learning how to actually produce those kinds of prompts that can actually work for you is something that is an art or a skill that you want to be able to gain in order for you to use those platforms. So we do realize that others still believe that research should be done only by humans. And that's quite an interesting point. So let me pass it back on to Andrew. You want to comment on this section, particularly vis-a-vis what you have seen in your region in the north?
Yeah, of course. Happy to comment on this. So, put this in the order of which was the most agreed with belief about research. And so it's interesting that the second one is AI is transforming research for the better. 78% of people agree with that, or strongly agree with it. At the same time, the third point, roughly the same number, think it speeds up research but doesn't fundamentally change it. So we've got this sense of like, well, I think we're still not sure. Is AI changing the nature of research in some fundamental way? Or is it just speeding up how it's done? Certainly, the strongest belief that people shared was researchers must remain ultimately responsible for research results. I'm sure we'll all agree it's essential to research integrity that the authors of the paper must know that AI was used appropriately in analysing data, in analysing previous research, blah, 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 writing the results. Then we've got two-thirds of people agree, two-thirds of those responding agreed that AI gives researchers in the global north an advantage. And I think it's for reasons Gracian's already touched on. It's like, well, to get the best version of AI, either your institution subscribes to it or you've got a big credit card that can cover that. And let's face it, most of us haven't. Um, but we know that privileged institutions in the United States, for example, they've got a much better research infrastructure anyway, and then they're going to have better AI as well. It's creating more of that kind of digital divide. And then the next one, about 50% agreed that it might reinforce this publish or perish pressure that we know already exists around research. And I go back to one of the previous answers where it said AI speeds up research. Um, the idea that it's got to speed up research. Why do we want it to speed up particularly? We want it to be better. Isn't that what we want? We don't want more speeding up, publish or perish pressures. We want those to be relieved. So, but if AI does that, well, people are split on that. But if AI does reinforce those pressures, that's a bad thing, I think. Then there's about 50% again were worried about the erosion of researcher skills. The more we use AI to say, right, the more we use AI to analyze data, the more we use AI to search for previous research, are we losing our own skills to do that? That's a risk I think we have to acknowledge. And then there's still this fraction of 24% of people are saying AI should never be used to analyze research data. AI use in research is unethical. There's still a significant part of people who do think AI is fundamentally problematic. And I think we all probably have that feeling that there's this risk, as Gracian said, it's like the verdict is out on what is going to be the impact of AI on research. But some people feel it very strongly. Next slide. Maybe you want to, I can pick up the next slide. These are just some quotes. So at the end of the survey, people very kindly shared some sort of final thoughts, and particularly about challenges. This showed up like fake citations was probably the commonest thing that people mentioned. There was a question about inaccuracy, but people wanted to bring out, I suppose, that issue. The addictive nature of AI usage wasn't mentioned very much, but there were a few comments like that. Then there's this nice quote about um, the lack of access. The free versions have limited use. Appropriate training is not available. I thought that was a good. That quote's just in there to summarise maybe a lot of what people said. And that fourth one, inadequate internet access and low bandwidth. So if we can't even connect to the internet, we're not going to be playing around with AI too much. So for some researchers where the resources are really low, that's going to be a challenge. I think the next slide is yours, Gracian.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. I just want to go back one slide there and make a point. I'm actually currently in Livingstone, in Zambia, attending the SCASCAL conference, which is being held just next to the Victoria Falls, which is really a great place to be. And the last few days, speaking to the researchers, we have got over 200 information specialists and librarians in this conference. And listening to what our concerns about generative AI use are, I picked up a few points, and that relates to what our findings are. And the issue of eroding the researcher skills came up time and time again. The referenced librarians, for example, the human touch that they have given to their profession when a professor walks into their office and they want to find out about a specific book or a specific topic, and they would like to get assistance from a reference librarian who really understands the context and can ask a few questions to the professor in order for them to be able to direct them to the right sources. But, with generative AI tools like ChatGPT, when you do your searches, especially when you work on your prompts, and you start wondering whether the responses are anonymized or are they tailored for you specifically given your historical searches that you've done before. And does that mean that this is the most objective answers that you're actually getting? And what is coming on top in terms of the recommendations that you are getting from ChatGPT? And you begin to wonder whether what kind of algorithms are being used and what are they really based on. If we all know that these kind of tools have been based on learning from sources that are limited, and some of those sources tend to be coming from the global north, or especially from the west. And therefore the context and the contextualization of that data that is actually being used is quite limited. The indigenous knowledge, for example, that is coming from Africa, indigenous knowledge that is coming from Southeast Asia or South America may not be coming on tops in terms of where they are learning, what they are learning, and what they are including and refining in the databases and algorithms that they are being used with these generative AI tools. And that really brings a point to say, when you do search, if I go to ChatGPT and I say, okay, Gracian, I would like you to tailor my CV for this particular job or for this particular assignment, the sources of what ChatGPT is going to use in order to help me to actually formulate that are going to depend on what I have used before and what questions that I have done before that it actually remembers. Okay, and where else I have actually published, and what are the limitations of those publications? If I have published, the indexing of what I've published, is it what is coming out only from the big databases that are out there, like Scopus and like, Web of Science and all that? Or are they also going to be including literature that is gray literature that I have actually worked on and that has not been published? And that is what informs the recommendations that I'm going to be getting out of my current search. And therefore, that is what the issue is all about, in saying who is creating knowledge and who is directing the creation of knowledge, and how inclusive is it going forward, particularly for the Global South researchers. So are we continuing with the same challenge that we have had of the digital divide, where most of the publications are actually coming from the online? And who is driving the agenda on all these kind of research and publications that are out there? So those are the conversations to be had. And I would like to now then summarize in terms of the findings of this study, in that the tools were not surprising that came on top. We saw the ChatGPT being one of the main cases that are out there in scholarship. And we also saw tools like Grammarly being used a lot. And what are they using that for? And I think, like Andrew has indicated, the use is mainly and largely to do with originating ideas and summarizing ideas, and of course synthesizing literature that you have got, or sometimes just doing a proofreading aspect of work that you are already going on with. A significant minority of use is to do with data analysis and drafting the actual articles or the actual reports. And again, it is a matter of who is pro that use of these tools and who is against it. And it goes back to the issue of skills. Are we continuing to build the critical thinking skills? Are we continuing to make sure that the statistical aspects of research, we will continue to gain those skills, continue with them, and ensure that especially our new career researchers are learning those basic skills in order for them to be able to generate the data from their empirical studies and be able to manage that data. They can code it properly and be able to do the data analysis and find out what that data actually tells them in terms of the findings. If we parcel that to a tool that is online, which has become kind of a black box, we throw in all those interviews that we have done, and it generates out the manuscripts, and in different languages, it can translate and interpret the findings, whether that interview was done in Spanish or it was done in French or in Arabic. And then we have the interpretations in English, and that data that is being generated can now been cleaned, and it can now be analyzed. Those skills, we are parceling them out to a tool like Claude, for example. And what are we leaving with our young, particularly our young researchers? What are they learning going forward? And again, the argument could come back and say, but we already are using the scientific calculators, which we didn't have before. And what did we lose when we started using more and more of the calculators? Were we able to actually do the work faster and accelerate what actually comes out in terms of our production? Or are we losing what is key in terms of the aspects that a researcher must actually learn and go forward with? We talked about the key barriers to use and the lack of institutional guidelines, the frameworks that I was talking about. Okay. Many universities are just getting on in terms of trying to find their way to direct, especially the students. I was talking to my son, and he is in his third year in information management at the University of Johannesburg. And he was telling me that what they actually do now in terms of exams, they are worried about the use of AI tools. And they will put the students in a big room, 300, 400 students, and ensure that they don't have access to their computers. And they actually ask them to write the manuscripts by hand, responding to the questions that they have in front of them. So going back to where printed exam sheets are actually distributed manually, and we've got an invigilator sitting there and ensuring that the students have got a pen and paper and pencil, and they're actually writing the answers in front of the invigilators to make sure that they are not leveraging any other tools. And that assessment is what they actually want to make sure that that is the student's work, and the student wasn't cheating using any of the tools that are out there online. Of course, there is the tools that they are looking at to make sure that plagiarism is managed, and for those kind of exams that the open book exams, they call them, and the online exams that they have. But the belief in making sure that the students actually are learning something is important. And how do you actually assess that with the students and ensure that they're actually getting the skills and the learning outcomes are actually met? The cost of access to these tools remains a major barrier, like I indicated before. So it's not just the amount that is being asked for by Claude to you to pay $22 for the premium and more usage of their tools. Because how to get to pay that $21 or $22, it can be a challenge for somebody who is at the University of Eswatini, at the University of Malawi, a researcher that doesn't have access to a MasterCard or a Visa card that can actually be used for that. So it might not just be the amount that you are looking for, but the means and modality of actually making that payment. And that separates you from a colleague who is at the University of Cornell in upstate New York, or who is at Yale University, who has got access to these kind of things, the credit cards, and they can easily do that. It means that they are already way ahead of you in terms of information that they can access, the tools that they can actually use. And therefore, the issue of equity in terms of information access, and also the equity in terms of access of tools and platforms out there, are going to be a challenge. And of course, we do see more and more collaborations between the Global South researchers and the Global North researchers, and across the board, the West and East. But are we working in an even playing field in order for us to be able to have those global conversations as far as research is concerned? The issue of ethics it varies through a continuum, and we all know without the frameworks, without the policies, how do we ensure that the ethics are actually being followed? A framework is important for us to be able to do that. If you go and look at the frameworks that are out there right now, looking at Egypt, looking at places like Nigeria, where they've been going on trying to put together, craft a framework for the last 3-4 years now, and it's still in the pipeline, you will see that there is still a lot that needs to be agreed upon. How do we ensure that we cite the use of tools that are AI driven? And how do we ensure that at the end of the day, we are still building skills, it's particularly at the postgrad level. And it's not only at the national level, but also at scholarly level to drive forward development going forward, to drive development for the future. So I would like to then pause now and see if we can get some questions and see your views as far as you are working with these kind of tools. Are they positive? Are they concerns? Are they in tandem with what we are seeing in the other regions, like the Global North, what Andrew was talking about, or the findings of this study that says, yes, there is concerns, but there is growing use of the tools that is happening at the moment, and we see similar kind of trends between the regions and going forward. Or are these early days? There's still to learn, and there's still many turns that are coming along the way, and it is a long journey. So let me pause on that. And then let's see what we get in terms of the questions so that we can wrap up this session. Thank you. Okay, Michael, you can let us know if there are any questions, comments that we want to address.
No questions in the chat, but feel free to unmute and ask. I see someone raised their hand there. Dorothy, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I see Dorothy Enea.
Yes,
yes. You can go with your question.
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Gracian, for this presentation. It's a good one, and actually I can identify with everything that has been presented. I think AI is an issue in our institutions, and at the moment, I think I, for one, I find myself between a rock and a hard place, because now, as you know, head of the library, I'm expected to give direction and guidance on AI usage. So all eyes are on me. Librarian, tell us this librarian, please give us direction. How do we deal with this? Actually, it is a great concern. And now, in terms of learning among the students, I think it is a challenge because now students are using AI to write their assignments, their essays, and they present them, and then they just copy and paste everything from AI. Everything is like AI written. And as universities, we don't have a way of maybe checking AI usage in the assignments. And you find maybe as a librarian, I have gained some skills that you can tell, at least some of these, the citations, you can tell, I think these don't look genuine, and you have a way of verifying. But some lecturers may not have those skills, and they just mark, and you find that the students are scoring high. But in a sense, they have not written, or the work is not their own. So it's like they are not developing any skills, critical thinking skills, writing skills, everything. So I think we are in kind of a danger where the type of graduates that we are, will be producing. I don't know. I would like to learn from others how they are dealing with this problem. Do you have a way of checking mainly students' work? At least maybe for those who are doing research, the researchers, maybe they are publishing. At least maybe there's a way they want to uphold integrity, research integrity, and the like. But still, and worse still, maybe we are still, taking our baby steps. Sometimes you find like AI, like, is it a taboo? People don't want to discuss it's happening, but people don't want to discuss it. You find, no, you get those dismissive comments whenever you want to bring it on. Like, maybe we need to put up a program where we can educate the students on the responsible use of AI, and you get kind of dismissive comments, like maybe you want to encourage them to use, but we say no, we don't want to encourage them, but they can use it, but in a responsible and ethical manner. So maybe I think I would like to learn from my colleagues elsewhere how they are dealing with this. Thank you, Gracian.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. You bring an important point. So maybe what we can do at this point is let's open up the conversation a bit more. I would like us to go and do a bit more discussion along those lines. Your concerns are very clear, but let's see what the other concerns are as well in the use, particularly in the scholarship areas, okay, in the scholarship arena. What else is going on? Okay, what are the others say? So you are worried about students not being able to build on their skills, the required skills that are out there. As your students, you want them to be able to have the critical learning skills. You want them to learn new knowledge. You want them to learn all these things. But this copy and paste has become a major challenge. And how do the lecturers make sure that they can discern that information and say, well, this is coming from the students themselves, or this is coming from a tool that they have actually used, and what's wrong with the use of that tool, and what are they using when we do that. Let me put back one slide, and then I'll ask Andrew to comment on that, and then we can try and move on. Okay. And if we can see the slide, you can just, take it from me.
Yeah, maybe if we jump to the next slide actually, because I think we've kind of covered those things. But yeah, so I know what researchers always say at the end of their talk is more research is needed. But we did think there's quite a lot of interesting things we need to find out because AI is changing pretty rapidly. We've had some comments in the chat to the effect that, oh, it's quite hard to keep up with the new platforms, new tools. I totally agree with that. Unless you're kind of focusing on AI as such, it's really hard to follow developments. And there are some other interesting questions, such as are people using the free versions of AI or paid versions? How is this impacting library use? Because we've heard a lot from Gracian already, and you know, anecdotally, librarians tell me people are using the library a lot less. They're not using licensed resources, which is really serious in terms of, you know, AI searches typically will find some open access material and a lot of web reports and things, but they won't find things that are in your library, the specialist, you know, master's studies of topics that you're interested in. And maybe it's interesting to find out, you know, how AI is different by senior, how AI is different by more senior or older people versus people in different disciplines. And of course, we got a very strong response from countries in Africa. We didn't hear anything very much from Latin America. We only got 2 responses from there. So I think there's probably a very different picture there. And maybe next slide. And the 2 things we wanted to leave you with was one was to discuss these barriers and how they can be overcome. And one thing that people said a lot was, well, there's a lack of institutional guidelines. And actually, there's a lot of examples of these. You could just take from global north states and just copy them. Why not? It's useful. But it seems that maybe the barrier isn't what should the points be. It's a bit like Dorothy was saying, and maybe it's a kind of bit of a question people don't want to talk about. What is the barrier to developing guidelines? What are the principles that we could write down that we all probably would agree with that should be enshrined in these guidelines? And how granular can they be? In other words, can we sort of focus on this very specific task, or do we just have, like Sheffield's got, it's got like 5 principles and they're very, very broad. Is that a good way to go? And then next slide. The other discussion point was we're thinking, oh, there's obviously a need for AI training, but what should that training cover? And Gracian wanted to like spark a conversation about what do you think AI training should cover? Should it? So it's something about finding what platforms are out there to use. Also about recognizing when you see AI is being used, how do you know that? He's already said something about writing good prompts. If you write good prompts, you're going to get better answers. But also it's about assessing the accuracy of answers in terms of accuracy and depth. And there's a lot of hidden bias in AI because AI was basically, a lot of generative AI was basically trained on English language, Western material. So it's got some very biased, strange assumptions built into it. And then when to use AI across this life cycle of research, how should we declare how we've used it? We need to know also about journal policies because a lot of journals are now saying you mustn't use AI in this way, you must use it in this way. And also things like reflecting on the impact of our skills and thinking about what about the wider social impacts. So there's a lot of debate in the press in my country on the environmental impact of AI. So it's what should training on AI really cover? We'd really like to hear your views because I think we're quite interested in developing an open educational resource around that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So maybe what I can do, let's just go back to the slide before, and that's the major barrier that seems to be, it's just, yeah, major barrier that seems to be the lack of institutional guidelines. I just wanted to see how many of the institutions represented here that have got some framework of some sort in your institution. Are there any guidelines that you have, maybe coming from the library or maybe coming from the research department? Do you have any framework that you actually use at your institution, be it at a university, be it at a research organization, a hospital, a research hospital, or a research station in agriculture or environment, or biosciences? Do you have any framework that you are using at your institution currently? Michael, you might have to help me if they are raising their hands. I can't see them.
Hello, Gracian. We talk. Blessing is a big advocate for librarians being advocates, okay, and getting the skills to be able to explain these things. And I think we all have to. I know that I'm in CapDev committee, and we have this new training material coming out, these lessons that I talked about before. And in both the lesson on writing and the lesson on publishing, we are discussing AI, okay, and how you can use it ethically. In fact, I'm pulling off the material and trying to put it into a PowerPoint presentation that could be distributed. So what I'm trying to say is we need to not so much say it's overwhelming, but try to develop tools and learn enough that we can at least explain it within our institutions.
Thanks, Lenny. Thank you. All right. Can we hear from the others? So there are not many frameworks going around at the institutional level at the moment.
When we get to a point of having some, maybe we're calling them tools, I don't know what the right phrase is yet, we should at least send it to all the participants of this of this webinar, so that they can see if any of the discussion there is worthwhile to use at their institution or adopt themselves. So we will get back to you when we have some tangible tools.
All right. I see we've got a hand from Biliamin. Yes, please go ahead, Biliamin. Yeah, Biliamin, if you can hear me, you can go ahead.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing up this conversation. It's timely. I think for institutional guidelines, one of the challenges we are probably having is that the institutions are populated, especially in the global south, are populated by people who are still grappling with what AI is, what it's being used for, and all this. As you rightly pointed out in the presentation that concerning the lack of skill, I think that is very, very key because even those who use AI, in my observation, have not really gotten the right orientation or the right training about the use. So the people who are supposed to come up with guidelines are still busy trying to understand what they want to write guideline on. And I think that is one of the major setback that we're having when it comes to not having institutional guidelines at the moment, especially in the global south. Because you can't provide guideline for what you yourself have not, what you haven't understood properly. And even if you have to adopt or adapt from somewhere else, the guideline will probably be lying there without anybody referencing or making use of it, because you are still busy trying to understand the tool in the first place. So I guess one of the major barrier, or one of the things that are causing delay in having institutional guidelines in this part of the world is because we are still trying to understand the use scenario. How do we properly use these particular tools? How do we use this technology? How do we make the best of it, making sure that it doesn't erode our understanding about research, about scholarship. It doesn't replace what we are supposed to. It doesn't give us a setback in terms of having the real skill and the real knowledge taken away from us. So I think these are some of the questions that many of us, many institutions are still battling with, that have not really made them to be so inclined to getting a guideline in place. This is just my own observation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I'm gonna put a slide here, okay? And that just meant to be an example, okay? This is meant to be an example. So if you look at the Northwest University framework, guideline, if you wanna call it, which is made available by the library, okay? It's quite clear what they are trying to do, okay? So what I can speak to is what they've put on the board. I can't speak to the actual use on the ground, but I can speak to what is going on in terms of what the authorities are trying to give to their constituencies of scholars, and that includes the professors, the researchers at the university, and of course, the students, okay? And these are the guidelines responsible for they call it the ethical use of artificial intelligence, okay? So they would like you to disclose AI tools have been used in your work, all right? The use of the actual logs of prompts and the outputs that you have actually gained. So in other words, in your work, you will actually, in your citing, you are actually going to be transparent about what you have used in terms of the actual prompts the prompts that you used. And of course, it's got a recording of the actual date when you have actually done it. And what kind of outputs that you were, maybe it was trying to find out about a literature review that you were doing, or you were trying to come up with a format for your report, be it for your dissertation or be it for your thesis, and what kind of framework what kind of sources you were actually using, and how much you have used in what you have found on the AI tool that you have used. So the transparency aspect, obviously they completely ban the presenting of AI-generated content as your own work, and this leads to misconduct, academic misconduct and plagiarism, and of course it's punishable by all the other guidelines that are there already existing at the university. So they point and emphasize that the human judgment is essential, and it's supposed to only be used to assist and augment the work that you are doing yourself as a researcher, okay? We all have known that the tools that we use, like PowerPoint, is an aid to what we are doing when we are doing a presentation, the conversation that we are having. You want to use it as a reminder, but that's not the tool that actually does the work for you. Whether you are using Prezi.com as a tool and you are leveraging its features and using it. So it's the same kind of thinking. It's the same kind of thinking. It is a tool that will aid the work that you are already doing as a researcher yourself. So the human judgment is quite important. Okay, if you are using it for things like they actually spell it out, grammar and spelling correction, that is acceptable. Language refinement, but to what level in terms of are you using it for clarity and flow of your thoughts? And that's what you are, it's just aiding you. And of course, the referencing format, things like that, but not the actual citations themselves, generating citations themselves. You want to make sure that you are actually going and curating those and making sure that you track them down and make sure that those citations are real and do exist. Okay. If you are trying to generate ideas and plan your actual research structure work or work, you must declare all those kind of usage. So that's a framework that is there for scholarship. Okay. But like Billy Amin has indicated, how much is it actually being implemented and used as a guideline? And what are the professors and the lecturers actually doing when when that manuscript land on their desk for assessment? And that is to be discussed at different institutions. So that's just an example that I wanted to share and see what you think about that at your institution. Will that be something that could be applicable at your institution? A framework like that, and would it be followed? Right. If there are no further comments, Lenny, I would like to just end this. But maybe let's hear from Tapiwa before we go further. Yes, Tapiwa, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gracian. In our case, we don't have any guidelines in terms of AI use, but we do have a what do you call it, a draft policy, which says that students are allowed to use 20% in terms of the students. But now, in terms of scholarly work now, we have we actually do publish it. And at one time, there's somebody who submitted a paper which had AI in it. But then at times people would argue, yes, I have used AI in terms of grammar, where I was correcting my grammar. I didn't use it for writing. I actually used it for grammar. At the end of the day now, it now becomes very difficult because we are using Turnitin to check use of AI plagiarism. But basically, the effectiveness of Turnitin now, it's now questionable because you would find that even something that you have written, if you load that and try to check whether it was AI written, you would find that it actually detects AI words. So it becomes difficult for the researchers themselves, because some of them are saying now submitting my work when it's being subjected to Turnitin, we are no longer safe, because at the end of the day, you would say that it's AI generated, but I know that I would have written my work. In that case, now there comes the issue where, of course, in the global south, people are using AI, but the price, the cost as well is another challenge, whereby most of the AI tools, for you to get information that maybe probably that is more relevant or contextual, perhaps you need to go further and subscribe, but it becomes very expensive. So most people would rely on the other part, which is the free versions of these AI tools, which at the same time are more prone to hallucination and also giving misinformation in terms of the context. So I think the guidelines that you have presented could help us as institutions in trying to assist our researchers as well as our students. That's my submission.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me ask Andrew. Andrew, particularly, she was talking about Turnitin. During my sabbatical last year when I was in London at one of the universities, there was guidance that once the students have submitted a manuscript, you as the lecturer, you as the professor are not allowed to throw it again into Turnitin, because the algorithm, what it does, it looks at similarities. Even if it had been submitted a week ago on Turnitin, now it is available online, and therefore a similarity will come in as 100% because that same work has already been seen online. Is that correct, Andrew? That's what she's alluding to.
Well, not exactly, because Turnitin will say this text was copied from a particular source, and if that source was a previous draft, you can see that as a teacher. But the real problem is, as far as I know, none of these tools, certainly that's the belief across the UK, is that none of these tools will really pick up AI, generated text. At least they won't pick it up to the extent where you can say, you used AI in the wrong way. They might, certain characteristics of text suggest that it has been used, but that's not enough to say, oh, you failed this course. There just may be a suspicion. Whereas Turnitin before was pretty reliable in seeing exact text being copied. So, as far as I know, and at least it's UK practice, and it may be different in other countries, we don't use Turnitin in that way anymore. So that I don't think that the only way to overcome, from a teaching perspective, is things like exams that you mentioned, other types of assessment that are hard for AI to do well on, such as, analyzing a case study that you've only presented in class, or asking students, and this is the Sheffield policy, is you've got to say how you used AI on and declare your use. Of course, that doesn't stop people who really want to cheating. But I mean, ultimately, I suppose, yeah, I don't think there's any way. You can't block AI, and you can't ban it. You can't detect it automatically. That's the stance of our university. But I suppose, the only positive thing I suppose to say about that is that we would say, well, we need everybody to use AI. We should be rewarding positive uses of AI in assessment. That's what I would say, not just focusing on penalizing cheating uses. Of course, there'll always be cheats. People buy essays. You can't detect that either. So you can't really solve that problem. A lot of these fundamental problems are not to do with AI. They're to do with higher education, institutional setups of like people desperately wanting accreditation, paying lots of money for it, but they don't really want to learn. And government's not paying enough to have smaller classes, and in smaller classes you can tell who's cheating, but governments won't pay for it. So maybe AI is exposing fundamental flaws in the learning and teaching systems, just as it's exposing some flaws in the research system.
Thank you very much. So Lenny, I'll end with the last bullet on this slide, and that's the work that we are currently doing at Cox and Sheffield University. We are formulating and putting together an AI course focused on research, the use of AI in research and scholarship. And it is a certified course that we will be offering. And again, we will be back to this constituency in terms of users to invite them to participate in that course. We think that it is early days in the use of generative AI in scholarship, and there's still a lot to learn, and we are here to continue with that conversation, working with the colleagues. Over to you, Lenny.
Yes, this has been incredibly stimulating, incredibly complex. I keep thinking of my colleague who teaches big American history courses and all the problems he has, even though the criteria is written. I just hope that everybody learned a little, got a little different perspective, were able to filter through all this and come up with some ideas that are applicable. And I appreciate all the communication from the participants, but especially for Gracian and Andrew, because they're tackling a very difficult issue that will not be going away. So on that note, I think we should end. We will make sure that everybody gets the link to the video. And I don't think except there are some very small presentations that we might also make available. Thank you very much, and keep looking for more webinars on this topic because they will be coming up. Okay. Any other quick questions, comments?
Thank you very much, Lenny and Gracian and the entire team. This has been a very good webinar and so enlightening. We've learned a lot, and we look forward to the upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Okay. You're all welcome, and thank you for joining and participating.